Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, a co-production of EWTN Radio and SpiritualDirection.com, where we provide you with a spiritual haven of rest and explore the riches of the wisdom of the saints and the path to union with God.
This is Dan and Jordan Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest,
your hermitage of the heart,
your monastery of the mind, where we lift our hearts and minds to heaven to draw upon the wisdom of the saints to help us navigate the tumult of this difficult life. And we're continuing a conversation today. We started with Dennis McNamara on Reverence, and our first show we did with him, he's an expert on liturgy. You can find that show out at spiritualdirection.com or on EWTN radio, and EWTN's website. But the discussion we had with Dennis was architecture matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how and it either tells the truth about what's happening in the Mass, or it lies, distorts, or sort of diminishes those truths. So we talked a little bit about that. As a follow-on, I wanted to talk about lies today that about liturgical reverence or reverence in liturgy. And reverence is both something that priests, of course, have a huge effect on, but the laity have a huge effect on as well.
Can I offer one plug so that people go back and listen to that show?
Yeah.
So we talked about this, and I thought, as I was thinking about this after the show, a question popped up in my mind. And I wanted to put it out there to priests and say, if you're a priest, go to the front of your parish, pretend that you've never been there before, and ask yourself, if I didn't know anything about the church, if I didn't know anything about the Catholic faith, and I walked into this building for the first time, would my church as a priest speak the truth of what is happening here? Look around and see. Because, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but unfortunately, there are many churches out there, Catholic churches out there, who the only difference between that parish and a Protestant parish, in my estimation, is that we actually have Jesus on the cross. But outside of that, there's really no visible difference, which is quite unfortunate. So I would challenge any of the priests listening to this, and even the laity. Maybe this is an exercise that you can do. And if you're looking for ways to give back to your parish and to your priest, and you find that, oh no, I've gone to the front of my parish and I can't really tell the difference, maybe that will inspire you to say, hey, I'd love to donate some money towards a statue, or, some artwork or some icons or anything like that. So just want to throw that out there. The deeper discussion, as you stated, we already had with Dennis McNamara, and you can find that on all of our channels.
Yeah, I think, I think I'd like to start with the first lie, kind of leaving off what we talked about with Dennis, and that is that architecture doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to a church that I visited in southern Florida. I think it was Naples, Florida. I don't remember the name of the church. But Stephanie and I walked in. We were traveling and speaking, and walked in, and it was a church in the round, which tells the lie that that we are more important. In my opinion, it tells the lie architecturally that looking at each other is more important than looking at Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional architecture of the church is cruciform. The altar is facing east. Jesus is on the crucifix. And the center of our worship is Jesus, not us, or not. And it tries to architecturally highlight a truth, and that is that Jesus is in you. But when we go to Mass, we're there to worship Jesus.
Right.
I'm not there to worship Jesus in you. I'm there to worship Jesus. I'm there to participate in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So church in the round is an architecture that in my opinion, lies in some respects, but in this church in particular was horrific. It had a wireframe corpus coming out of a skylight. And of course, the wireframe means that there are no visible, other than a vague
like outline
of a human,
right?
Just vague, though. Yeah. Of course, that there's no blood, it's not a true corpus or crucifix, but he's coming down on the altar, and there's some good symbolism they were looking for there, but the way they did it, it just looks like some dude parachuting out of the sky.
Yeah, and if there's anyone who's listening and thinking, well, that's a subjective opinion, we need to also note that there is an objective reality of beauty. There's objective beauty.
Yeah.
And Father Ripperger actually gives a phenomenal talk talking about the psychology and theology of what objective beauty is.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to note that to say essentially, while there will be some personal opinions in here,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to things like that, what is and isn't objectively beautiful, that is a defined truth, and that is not your opinion. That is something that is, in this case, that is just not objectively beautiful.
Yeah, what you like may or may not be relevant to what is appropriate architecture.
Right.
The architecture has to tell the truth doctrinally about what's going on. Jesus wasn't a ghost, as the wireframe, image kind of hints at. He was real. He was literal. He was crucified on the cross, and that particular corpus is more akin to a Docetist heresy of the first century, where Jesus was a spirit and not fully God, fully human. So I would call that heretical. The second element of the parish, which was was alarming. I actually have photos of this, and I need to put up a post on it. But I was looking for the tabernacle, and I because it's in the round, there's no directionality to the place, and I discovered it, and what I discovered was horrifying. So the sanctuary was in the center, and it was elevated. The tabernacle wasn't in the sanctuary. It was down at the same level as the nave, typically where the parishioners sit and worship, sit, stand, and kneel. And it was just a door in this weird looking construct that it was almost like a house. And there was a guy, if you can picture, leaning up against it with his right elbow. The tabernacle's right behind his right shoulder, talking to another person with a stroller. What does that architecture say? Ain't nothing important going on here.
Right.
Hang out as you will.
Right.
God is not there, because we wouldn't act this way if we thought he was.
Right.
So this architecture is saying the presence of Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, is almost meaningless, slightly elevated by the golden door, but it's down at the level of the people. It's not in the sanctuary, separated heaven, right? And it's so architecturally banal that somebody could just lean up against right next to it and just have a, shoot in the breeze about whatever. So, that's probably the worst architecture I've ever seen. But that leads into this other area, and that is that I've seen good priests who I have respect for believe, act, think, whatever sequence makes sense, about the architecture and the way things are done in the Mass in ways that detract from what they even say they believe. So I'll give you an example. One was, I had a conversation with a priest in a very large parish that had a lot of people coming in and out of it. And the main group is there, and then there's people who travel and all that. And I said, we really need to have a statement before Mass, because I always sit up front. So I see people who walk up who don't know what they're doing.
Right.
And then they're given communion. And I don't get that. If anyone ever acts weird,
I've chased down someone,
right.
I'm sure you probably have. And chased down, I say nicely. I tapped the guy on the shoulder. He had no clue, wasn't malicious. And I just kind of talked to him very kindly, and we solved the situation. But yeah, that's to your point.
Yeah. So I sometimes I watch, and I shouldn't, and I see these weird actions, and I'm thinking that, in quotes, extraordinary minister should not have given communion to that. They're clearly not Catholic. They don't know what they're doing.
Right.
we need a statement at the beginning of Mass that says, if you're not Catholic, you're welcome, but you can't receive the Eucharist
Right.
because we love you.
We'll give you a blessing.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm not, that's, by the way, that act isn't found nowhere in the liturgy or
The blessing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or if you are not a believer, it's not, that's a different subject, but just as an FYI, it's not found anywhere. There's no liturgical guidelines that I'm aware of that say, but anyway, but the point is, so I said, I'd be happy to create a statement according to the teachings of the church that say, you're welcome, but you can't receive. EWTN does that at their masses. And I was working at EWTN at the time. And the priest said to me, something was very, very telling. Very good priest, by the way. He said, it won't work. And I was, it was one of those shoulder droop moments, sigh moments, like, okay, all right. And I just knew, it wasn't going to go in a good direction. And so I yielded. But there's a lie so that's a lie. It won't work. Now, there is a truth in it and a lie in it. By itself, a statement like that is not going to solve the abuse of the Eucharist by people who don't believe.
Right.
That's true. In conjunction with a lot of other things that should be constantly going on in a parish, it will help. And so not doing it does harm. Doing it, reading a statement like that, does help, but it has to be done in conjunction with many other things.
My question would have been, define not work.
Right.
Because if this is a game of percentages, for lack of a better term, let's say that, okay, yes, there's still going to be people who are going to come up and receive, who have no idea what they're doing, who haven't been to confession and who knows how long, and they're receiving mortal sin, which I did. I'm not condemning anyone. I'm painfully aware of it because I did it.
Yeah.
Because it's horrific. So that's still going to happen. But if there's 0.1% of people who then choose to receive more reverently or more appropriately, or who go to confession, is that not a major win? I mean, Scripture even says that the heavens rejoice over one person who is turned away from their sin. I'm totally misquoting that.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I'm not, I don't know the priest. I'm not saying this to knock him or anything. It just, hearing it from the other side, it's a very defeatist attitude.
It is a very defeatist attitude.
And it's like, well, you're the protector of
Jesus. And the souls of the people receiving.
And if maybe this is just my cop background, but it was like, if I can do one little thing to make sure that some horrific thing doesn't happen, and it's so low effort, why would I not do that?
Exactly. That's a great argument. It's a very low effort thing. It takes a second to read a statement like that.
The beautiful fact that no suffering is wasted, that all suffering has a purpose, and to wrestle with the idea, which is that everything that happens in our lives is either willed or permitted by God. Okay, God, why would you permit these things? I know that you're a good father and you're a loving father, so there's something there. So I have to bridge this gap between your permission of my suffering to your love for me as a father. And Uniformity with God's Will, the book by St. Alphonsus Liguori, bridges that gap. And he explains, as only he can, because he's such a hard hitter, the reality that these are all moments of growth, of virtue, of, hey, your legs are weak. You're like a newborn deer. You can't stand on your own. We need to get you to stand on your own. Those sorts of things. Even desolation. The day-to-day kind of the ebbs and flows of the spiritual life. Those things are all permitted for a greater good, whatever that might be.
Check out the brand new updated version of Uniformity with God's Will, titled Finding Peace in the Storm, with commentary by Dan Burke.
It's the perfect being the enemy of the good, right? So one statement won't solve the whole problem, so I'm not going to do the one statement. But to your argument, if it keeps one person from receiving when they shouldn't, That's one less desecration of the Lord, because that's what it is. When a person receives in a state of mortal sin, it is a sacrilege.
Right.
It is a grave sin against the Lord, and it does damage to the soul of the person. So if you love the person and you love the Lord, it seems to me you should be motivated to do 1,000 little things that help to make sure people come forward properly and receive communion.
Right.
So this is to my next point. Culture. This is how I define culture. It's the collective beliefs and values of any group of people as expressed in the way they live. The collective beliefs and values of any people as expressed in the way they live. What is the way people express the way they live in the church today? How do we know? Well, we can watch it. We can observe it. We can see people being very irreverent or very reverent. We can see that. Surveys tell us what they believe, and usually what they believe is how they live. Not always, but it's very common. And so we have surveys that are very bad that say most people don't believe. And
specifically in the real presence of the Eucharist.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Most people don't believe. So I think it would be very foolish for any particular priest or any leader in any church, a Catholic church of any, to assume, oh, their parish is different than all the other parishes.
Right.
That data doesn't apply to them. Well, so what if yours is better? What if half of them believe? It means half of them don't.
Right.
Now, what does that mean about half of them receiving communion?
Yeah, half of them are committing sacrilege, essentially.
Right.
Which is not even. And I want to note, we're not saying those people bad. We're saying, oh, gosh, that is the Lord.
Let's think about
being
this.
Desecrated.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a cry of the heart. Because like I said, that's why I said that I did it when I was at my worst and I had no concept of what was actually happening.
Yeah.
And I wish someone, I don't know, I mean, you guys did your best, but I was off in my own land at that time. I wish I had heard a homily that had explained it so that I knew that what I was doing. So I didn't suffer later on thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many times I did that. You know what I mean? So it's not, there's no condemnation of the people who are doing that action. It's more so of we love Jesus.
Yeah.
We desire Jesus in the Eucharist. We desire that he is held to the utmost reverence. And he is, I got to imagine that he's in the back of the church just weeping. That's me.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can think of him.
It's horrific. It's so, and to your point, the priest that I am, not the church in the round, what I heard was that there was a new priest there and he was kind of a victim of this whole thing. But the one I was talking about who said that won't work is a really exceptional priest.
Yeah.
Liturgically and in many ways. But I guess one of the blessings I have is my background is in organizational development. I've managed multiple global entities. I still do that now. And you've worked in the context that I lead, and I think you can attest to the fact that we have a very unified team.
Yeah.
We're very clear about our values and why we do what we do. There's a reason for that. And the reason it's like that is because I know that I need to tell you, reinforce in you and everyone in the team in a million different ways what this is all about. And that is not done in parishes.
Right.
So will one statement that says, if you're not a Catholic, please remain in your pew, you're welcome here. If we gave you the Eucharist, we would be inviting you to commit a sin, and we love you and we don't want you to do that against the Lord or yourself. 1 Corinthians 11:27. Will that statement stop? No. Will it with 1,000 other messages? You darn well better believe it will.
Yeah.
Will it perfectly? No, that's just not possible. People are not perfect. But if there's a plaque at I love the little stands, before you enter into the nave, which is the place where Catholics sit, kneel, and pray, that say silence. This is a place of reverence and focus on Jesus. Please turn your phones off and remain in perfect silence. Whatever. I love those things.
Yeah.
That's a message. Don't receive the Eucharist. That's a message. The architecture is a message. Church in the round, it's all about you. That's the message. Come in, yap all you want, whatever.
Well, there's no order to it, which I
Yeah.
find interesting,
Yeah.
because the entirety of our faith and Jesus and is all about order, right? Rightly ordered things and things within an order.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that as you were describing the Church of the Round, and I thought, well, of course people don't understand there's no order.
Yeah.
Nothing is pointing to this is the Holy of Holies.
Right.
This is the most important thing in the church. This is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just kind of chaotic, and well, I'll figure it out and I'll show up. And I've heard this with kids or with parents with young kids who go from the ordinary form to the traditional Latin Mass. And I'm not making any comments on either of them. I'm just telling you what I've heard.
Yeah.
They said that when they brought their kids, for the most part, because kids are kids, from ordinary form to Latin Mass, they start behaving better over time. Why is that? Because there's a lot of order there. Everyone is ordered to one thing. The church, the architecture is ordered to one thing.
And it's not about you there. It's about Jesus, and
Yeah.
you coming to Jesus as certainly your salvation, but the focus is on us worshiping God.
Right.
Yeah. So I would just say to our beloved priests out there, if you want to increase reverence and you want people to believe, the architecture needs to say that there's something special going on here. Statements before Mass, little sign, there's a million ways. There needs to be formation about it, and not just once. I mean, I used to work for a guy who was a brilliant leader, but his number one weakness was he thought if he said it once, everybody ought to know it and get it and follow it. And that is just radically contrary to human nature. Do you know how many times you have to teach about reverence to get people to be more reverent? 1,000, right? And if this is about Jesus and authentic worship, is that too much?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah. You're reminding me now. So we had recently interestingly enough, I don't know what it was, 2 different parishes, 2 different homilies that the priest mentioned or talked about in some way, people talking before and after Mass, immediately before and immediately after Mass, and kind of bemoaning the fact that this happens. And what's fascinating to me, when you just said what you said, it reminded me of the concept of extreme ownership, which I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's something that I've implemented as a manager here.
Describe it.
So extreme ownership, if no one's ever heard of it, is a process that was coined by Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL. It's an amazing TED Talk on this very thing. And it's essentially, it's a flipping of understanding when it comes to managing and teaching and leading people, primarily leading people, especially in this context, priests leading people, managers leading people. And what it says is, if something goes wrong, I can't assume that it's on them first.
I totally agree with
I
that.
have to assume that I didn't train them well enough or provide them with what they needed.
I have failed them.
I have failed them.
If I'm managing a system and people in that system and they do the wrong thing, the first thing I have to ask is, and I used to do this, but I never read or anything of Jocko, I've just listened to you, but this is my practice. Have I trained them right?
Yes.
Do they have the right measures in place?
Right.
Do they have all the tools that they need? How am I reinforcing what I've asked them to do?
Right.
Is there anything I'm doing that's contradictory? I start ticking off all those boxes. Now, if I tick all those boxes and they're still behaving, contrary, then they don't fit in the organization. Well, but most of the time you're going to solve the problems.
Right.
Yeah.
And then and at the very least, especially in this case, then okay, I've done everything I can. My hands are clean.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, let's also be clear, not to scare anybody, but priests especially will have to answer for their flock. Right? Yeah. To some extent.
Oh, to a great extent.
Yeah.
Any leader,
right.
Scripture's clear. You, by the way, will incur a stricter judgment because you're teaching right now.
Listen, that's one of the, there's about 3 or 4 different scripture verses that constantly rotate in the back of my head, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
It's constantly in the back of my head. But as a driver of goodness and a safety block, so to speak, to make sure that I'm not going off the rails. So keeping that in mind, you're going to have to answer for your flock. But at least you can have some peace that if you've done all those things, if you step back and you ask yourself, as I've asked myself, okay, this wasn't completed, the outcome was not what I expected. What did I do wrong first?
Yeah.
Was I not clear?
Yeah.
How do I make it so that this person achieves what they desire to achieve and what I need them to achieve,
Right.
or what I desire them to achieve?
Yeah.
That is a huge shift in mindset that really helps kind of tie all this together in a way. So I don't know.
No, but you're heading towards, you had a situation where you heard a homily. This is all set up for that.
Yeah. So, again, from what I know of, one priest I know very well, and I know he's an amazing priest. The other one I don't know at all.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's a great priest.
Yeah. That's generally
from the little things
default.
that I've heard. I'm basically just saying I've known this one priest for a very long time. This other one, I kind of know cursory from my homily here and there. And from everything I could tell, he's solid, right?
Yeah.
Clearly believes. And he was bemoaning the fact that there was people talking before and after Mass. And it was fascinating. And I loved the homily. It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting to me is that after the Mass, the only people who were talking were the extraordinary ministers. That was it.
Yeah.
Everyone else was like, you could almost, I don't know, you were there.
Yeah.
It almost felt like the congregation was like, ooh, yeah, I need to be careful.
And then the very people that are closest to the pastor,
right,
under his direct authority relative to what happened, and they're yapping it up. Yeah, I remember that. I almost smacked my forehead so hard I would have had to go into an ambulance.
Yeah.
Just like, what is going on here?
What you have heard is part of a full discussion on Lies About Reverence.
Yeah.
If you want to listen to the full
discussion,
you need to go to spiritualdirection.com's YouTube channel and subscribe, and you'll find it there. But this is just a clip, didn't cut off randomly at the end. This is a long discussion. We're trying some longer form stuff. So if you want to listen, if you enjoyed it, spiritualdirection.com YouTube channel, go subscribe.
All right.
Learn more about the interior life. Visit spiritualdirection.com. Divine Intimacy Radio is a co-production of EWTN Radio and spiritualdirection.com and heard worldwide on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.